are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Anna. Thank you for asking. How are you doing?
We're making it. We're making it.
We're making it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a little bronchial infection going. You got a little mononucleosis going.
Yeah, we're
Quite the
doing
pair.
great. Yeah, we're
Yeah, it's
doing
gonna be
so
awesome.
great.
It's gonna be great. It's gonna work
I'm
out.
fabulous, fabulous. Yes. But I appreciate your time anyway for making the time to talk about this because I really wanted to help promote Sarafina, which is one of your latest or upcoming releases. It's a limited edition release with Earthling. I had the luxury of being able to read it and I loved it. And I think everybody needs to
Well,
know about it. And so I would love to talk about it some more. But for
yeah.
people who don't know you, you are Philip Fracassi, you are a horror author. And what else should they know about you?
Oh golly. I don't know. I think that kind of covers it. I mean, I am a horror writer. I'm dabbling in I dabble in sci-fi. So I guess I'm a genre, but I do, but horror is my home base. It's where I always come home to. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. Let's see, what else is interesting about me? Not much. I was a screenwriter. I am a screenwriter. Used to write some movies for Disney. I wrote a children's movie for Disney called um, Santa Paws 2, The Santa Pups, which is not a
Oh,
horror film,
I love
but
that so
but
much.
it is for 5-year-olds. Um, I wrote a Lifetime movie called Girl Missing. I'm very fortunate that one of my stories, Alter, is being made into a movie right now as we speak by A24, which is fun. And I got to go visit the set for a week, which was very cool. Um, and yeah, I don't really have, I've worked in film and TV for on and off for 30 years. I've owned a bookstore for a decade. I worked in the music industry for about 7 years. And now I write full time. So it's been an interesting life, and I'm happy to have gotten this far. And I'm happy to finally be writing full time, which has been my dream since I was like in third grade. So it's very fulfilling, and I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that you're being a little too humble there. You are a very busy writer. I tried to make a list. I've read Boys in the Valley, which was Stephen King. It scared Stephen King, so that's like a huge accomplishment, and that's been one of your more popular works, I find. But my personal favorite from you is Gothic still. That
Thank
came
you.
out with Cemetery Dance, or at least that's where my copy's from them. You also had a short story collection that came out, I believe, earlier this year, No One is Safe. And then on top of that, like you said, Alter is being adapted. You have Serafina coming out. There's a chapbook with Rapture Publishing called The Witch Tree that ties into Serafina. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Partially. And
Yes.
then
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a
and then
tie-in.
you also have the third rule of time travel, which is your sci-fi dabble with Orbit next year, and then
Yeah.
also another Nightfire novel next year.
Yes.
So you are a very busy writer.
Yes. Yeah. Next year is going to be fun. I also have and I only mention it because I feel obligation to these publishers who I work with. The wonderful shortwave
Oh yeah, and
publishing
you just
is,
announced
is
that one.
is doing a novella of mine called D7, which is about a haunted jukebox. So yeah, so next year will be a lot of fun. I have the sci-fi in March. I believe the novella comes out in May, and then yes, the new Nightfire novel will be out September. I believe September 30th of next year.
Yeah.
And and it hasn't been announced yet, but I have another book that's coming out spring of 2026 um, that that hasn't been announced yet. So that'll also be happening. So yeah, lots going on. It's been a lot. It's been an intense year.
Yeah, yeah. Very, very busy. And I kind of have to ask, I mean, it's kind of a easy question to ask you, but like how the hell are you doing it? Like because yeah, whenever I've talked to you before,
Yeah.
and you're somebody who speaks very creatively, like you have a lot going on. Like I can tell you've got a lot of story ideas and things that you want to write about and things that you want to explore. So whenever you're this busy and you've got these many, projects rolling, how do you keep it all together and straight for every project because you execute so well. So I guess I'm
Oh,
wondering what the
thanks.
secret is.
The secret is, Anna, that I have no life. I literally I work every day. Usually on the weekends I take it a little lighter. Like today, I'd be watching football if my team was playing.
Yeah.
But so, but no, I work a lot. I'm at my desk a lot. I work about 80 hours a week, give or take. Um, and it is my full-time job, so that makes it easier as well. And yeah, and I guess my only thing is I try to, I'm very focused. I'm very much a per project guy. So I'm only really working on one project at a time. It's very hard for me to multitask creatively because when I'm writing a book, I want to be thinking about that book 24/7. I want to be thinking about the scenes and the characters and what's coming up and what can I do differently or what's something cool that could. And sometimes just by thinking about the story over and over and over in my head, a cool scene will pop up or something, and I'll use it. Um, so yeah, I'm a per project guy, and there is a lot of stuff coming out. I think I don't know what this. I mean, I don't know what the secret is other than I just work really hard. I'm just at I
Yeah.
just I put a lot of hours in. Um, it's also what I'm very fortunate that my job is something I'm very passionate about, so it's a good combination. Um, and also there's a little bit of like, there's a little bit of anxiety with writing. You as a writer, you always feel like you need to have things coming out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, and Alma Katsu just wrote about this in her last newsletter. But otherwise, you feel like you kind of slip a little bit, and you got to kind of keep yourself out there and keep getting more and more awareness and keep building readership. So it's hard. You don't necessarily want to have a book come out and then have another book come out in 3 years if you can help it. And so I try to have at least one or two books out a year. I work a lot with smaller press. I obviously work with Big Five press. So I try and mix it up in that sense. Like Gothic, you mentioned, was with Cemetery Dance. Boys in the Valley was with Tor Nightfire. Um, and then I'm doing the Orbit thing, and then but the 2026 book is back. It's with another indie press. So I kind of like to keep my work somewhat diversified as to who's putting it out and what market they're good at. How they position the book within a marketplace. Is an interesting thing as well because when you're writing a science fiction novel, that's got to be marketed one way, and then it's a very commercial novel in the sense it's
Yeah.
a thriller versus like something like Gothic, which is a bit more niche. It's a bit more for hardcore horror fans, I think. So
Yeah.
Cemetery Dance made a lot of sense. But yeah, so anyway, I don't know. I just keep churning away, and I'm very fortunate that I'm able to sell my work to people and who put it out there. It's just I've been lucky in that sense.
Yeah, and I mean, well, like you said, it's a lot of hard work, and I think that the other thing too to keep in mind is like the publishing wheels move a lot differently than how it seems. So it's like you said, you want to keep having something ahead of time, even if it doesn't look that way. Like you know your publishing schedule better than we do, obviously on the outside, and some publishers are like move a little bit slower and quicker than others. So I mean that makes sense, but it certainly seems like you are incredibly busy this year
Yeah,
heading into next.
yeah. I mean, I'm basically thinking 2 years ahead.
Yeah.
So the stuff if I were to write, like right now I'm working on rewrites for the book that's coming out next September, um, but if I were to be writing something new, I would be assuming it would be a 2027
Yeah.
release. So yeah, you're always kind of stacking stuff up, and you're always planning really far ahead because you're exactly right, which is from the day you sign, from the day you sign your deal with the publisher, you know, you'll be lucky if that book comes out within a year. It's usually a year and a half to year
Yeah.
and a half, I guess on average 2 years. So yeah, I guess they just kind of keep piling stuff up, and I have a great agent who works really hard for me, um and we just and I'm also kind of aggressive about I'm aggressive about getting stuff out, which I kind of mentioned. But what I mean by that is if I have an offer, um, I'll probably take it. If it's a decent
Yeah.
offer, it's a fair offer, and I think it's a good fit for the book, like I mentioned earlier. I'll take it, and because I just want to get the work out versus say, let's shop it for another 6 months and
Right.
let's see if we can get a big a big five involved, or maybe a larger imprint involved, or whatever. So I'm much more aggressive because I'm kind of of the mindset that um, um, that I can write more.
Yeah.
There's more
Yeah.
where that came from. So I'm
Yeah.
not thinking like, oh, this is the one thing. And I've got, I'm more like, yeah, let's get this out, and then I'll work on something else. And if some publisher wants another book from me, then I can write another book. So that's kind of my mindset when I'm out there trying to get work sold to people.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so I guess that kind of leads me into my next question for you is, the blanket statement of, well, how did Serafina come to be? And like how long ago did you start working on that story?
Well, so Serafina was okay, when I sold Boys in the Valley, it was a two-book deal.
Right.
And Serafina, I'd given Nightfire three options for a second book. And Serafina originally was the one they wanted. When I actually So I wrote the book, and I think I wrote the book in about 3 months. And when they got the book, I think they just weren't sure how. I don't want to put words in my mouth, but I think it was kind of an awkward match. Like, I
Yeah.
think it's historical fiction, um, and and I think Nightfire has a little bit of a different um, market
Yeah.
for their books. So just it was kind of a weird fit. And so I think we just kind of mutually decided maybe to want to do something else for them, and I'll take Serafina elsewhere. And then, uh, but but it was a difficult book to write because I wrote the book, and I think this was early 2023,
Hmm.
and was this and is that right? When did Boys in the Valley come out? What year are we in now? 2024.
Yeah.
So I
Time's not
think it
real.
was, yeah, maybe it was. Shit, I should know this information. But anyway, I wrote it. The point is, I wrote it early in the year because Boys in the Valley came out in 2023
Yeah.
June.
Yeah, with
So
Nightfire.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so anyway, so I wrote the book in early 2023, and then what happened was all this Nightfire stuff happened, and then my father got ill, and I had to go home and take care of him back in Michigan, but I had a deadline for the book, so I ended up doing the rewrites for this book while I was taking care of my father who was dying. And so it
Oh
was,
man, yeah.
and he had dementia, and it was very hard. And so, but I had to get the book done because I was on deadline. So I ended up writing it really fast, but it also ended up being a really dark book.
Yeah.
Um, because I was dealing with some very dark emotions
Yeah,
while I
yeah.
was writing it. So so I think it just kind of made it a different kind of story. Then it's not poppy, it's not progressive, it's not shocky. It's kind of, I'm actually kind of surprised that people who have read it have actually liked it, because when I wrote it, I was kind of thinking this is too dark. People aren't going to want to read this. And but I like it. I mean, I like the way it ended up. It was kind of an emotional book. It was an emotional process um, that I was going through when I was writing that book. And then when I was and the second book that I had with Nightfire, which is coming out, which I'm rewriting right now, which is called The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre.
Yes.
That book, I had pitched them, and they loved it, and then last year my mom passed away, and I had to write this book, and I was kind of going through all this like really difficult emotional trauma, and I kind of used the book as this sort of like dumping ground for
Yeah.
all this stuff that I had in my head, because the book is about elderly people, but it's not farcical. It even despite the title, it was gonna be, and I ended up take instead of it being like a dark humor, a darkly humorous slasher, which was
Yeah.
my original kind of intention and pitch. It kind of became a very heartfelt story about aging and about death and about family, and then but it's also a slasher. So it's kind of a weird thing. So I don't know how it'll be. I don't know how people will find it, or will they will people like it or not? I don't know. But it's but it's interesting because it's been the last couple books I've written have been kind of heavy in that
Yeah.
sense. Um, but very cathartic, and also, I think to a degree, you know, kind of a homage to my parents. Like in a way, like I'm putting, there are conversations that I had with my dementia-addled father that have made it into the book, and things like that, and things that my mom used to say that I've worked into the book. And so I think it's a nice way for me as a writer to have these moments immortalized in ways that hopefully are is entertaining and emotional, for the readers. But and I don't even know what the original question was, so I apologize. But
No, no.
that, I think we were talking about. I don't know what we were talking about, so I'm sorry.
Well, no, no. I
I
mean, I was just
tangent. I tend to tangent. I
no,
apologize
I'm all
ahead
for
of
the
time.
tangent.
Okay,
No, I mean, I think I was kind of talking to Nat Cassie about this 2 weeks ago, I think, but
sure.
when you write from a raw place, it's kind of something special because a lot of his books, he writes from a emotional place of things that he's kind of gone through without necessarily postulating like, hey, I'm gonna work through my mom issues today and this, like it just kind of happens naturally. And so
Yeah,
I think it's really kind of special whenever I think authors are able to in a way give part of themselves to a book like that. It means a lot. It comes through at least to me in the reading experience. And those like experiences that you had like with your dad and with your mom, like you can't ever forget that. That's like deeply ingrained in you and that's going to change who you are fundamentally as a person and like you can't remove the person from the art.
for sure.
So that's it's part of the whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's an element, I think with any book you write or any story you write, obviously there's an element where you're bringing something in very personal because that's how you match that's how you put emotion into a story is you have to take a little bit from yourself and
Yeah.
you have to put it into the work. And um and but yes, I think there is one of the nice things about being a writer, one of the positives about being to express yourself in an art form that is writing is that you can share things with people, in a way you can share, moments, you can share, thoughts, you can share emotions that you have that you want to maybe have expressed to somebody in a creative way that is, hopefully plot driven, and but yeah, so it's one of the pleasures of being a writer for sure is to be able to do that sort of thing in your work. And I'm sure it's the same with painters or with musicians as well, which is that it's like you put so much into your art that, and hopefully you can express it in a way that readers can empathize with and connect with. Um, and that's something that I try to do with every story and every book that I write for the most part. I've
Mhm.
written stories and books. I've written stories that are much more like, look, this is just for fun. Like we're just
Yeah.
gonna have fun right now, and this is like we're gonna get a little goofy and we're gonna have some fun. But for the most part, I do try and engage readers emotionally on an emotional level because I think that makes it a much more pleasurable experience as a reader. Is that if you're connecting with the characters or if you're connecting with the themes or the ideas that the writer is presenting, I think it gives you such a much more lasting experience. And that's what I always strive for, especially with my novels. But that's something I always strive for is I really want to try and connect with readers emotionally and maybe even psychologically, and maybe and just kind of get them to really buy in to what I'm doing, and kind of immerse themselves a little bit more with the action that's taking place versus it just sort of being like, skating on thin ice. Your safety is in your speed. I just don't
Yeah.
want them to feel like we're just, it's just another it's another, no offense, another James Patterson book or another, what, like a dime store novel that you read and you leave behind in the cabin that you were, being um with your boyfriend or whatever. Like I want it to be something that you think about and treasure and maybe take with you a little bit. So that's kind of what I shoot for. I don't know if I always get there, but it's the
No,
goal.
I think that you do, and I think the genre of horror in and of itself kind of lends itself to those things because we're dealing
Yeah,
with a lot of more of the like visceral emotions and those kinds of things. But I mean, as tragic as all is, there's like an odd sort of beauty in it. And, like I
for sure.
can't, anytime anybody mentions the loss of a parent, like you want to say like, I'm so sorry and express sympathy for those things. But there's also the point of, that you're going to go through that too one day. And the ability to share in that experience through art is something really special. Um,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so the art,
And that's what I think, and that's what I think gave this book I'm writing right now, the one's coming out next September, I think is what gives it, a lot of depth
Mhm.
is that I wanted it to be you mentioned, I wanted it to be a book where I tackled really hard issues, and very real issues,
Yeah.
very real issues of, look, when you get to a certain age, you have a couple options. The first option is that you can, and I'm not going to go into all this, but the idea being that you can either like put it on your kids or you can put it on yourself. And I think that a lot, and I think that's like a really hard decision for a lot of people,
Yeah.
for financially and just for personal reasons. So that have nothing to do with finances. So a lot of that was really interesting to dig into, um, with this particular novel. Whereas in Serafina, the novel that I know you wanted to primarily talk about, that is just, I think that was a book where I really wanted to get into family and
Yeah.
the bonds of family, and the links that you will the links you will go to. That's probably not putting it the right way, but the things that you will do, for family.
Yeah.
And one of the things I got back about that, one of the comments I got back about that book after the first couple drafts was, I don't buy that this person would do this. Why would they put themselves in harm's way? And I'm like, because they're family. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what you do. But I think
Hmm.
there were some people that it didn't connect for them. And I thought that was interesting. Like, it maybe I did another pass of the book where I did things a little bit differently. I think the one you read is the most recent.
Hmm.
Um, that was the Earthling edition. So, but yeah, but that was interesting. But that was one of the things I was trying to get across with Serafina was, these brothers and the sister, um, and even to an extent Serafina and her
Yeah.
relationship with Titus. I really kind of wanted to get across a lot of that, the really sticky bonds that we have with our siblings and with our family, and I get into the father and the mother and all that stuff too, later in the book. So that was like the overriding theme of what I wanted that book to be,
Hmm.
um, with, like, a super scary monster in the woods,
Yeah.
because that's
Well,
because that's what makes it fun. It's
yeah.
like sugar. It's like sugar with, cold syrup. It's like, what I
Oh
mean. It's like
no.
you're gonna take your olive oil, or you were like in the old days they used to get the kids, they had to drink the
Yeah.
oil, whatever it was.
The spoonful of sugar helps medicine go
Yeah, and you
down or
put
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, and you get yeah. So that's the sugar is the monster, and the family, the heavy family things are the cold medicine, other medicine.
No, it's so true though. But I mean, so you kind of mentioned something about how Serafina is a novel that's a little hard to classify, and I kind of
Yeah,
want to go back to that for one reason, in the sense that I'm a fan of your work and I want to read pretty much anything that you write. So whenever I
thank you.
saw that Serafina was announced, I was like, oh, I can't wait. And then I read this, like the little blurb for the synopsis, and I'm not a history buff, and I was like, I'm really not a huge person to read like war narratives. And so like the way
Yeah,
that it's pitched, is it's about like these three brothers during Civil War era times who decide to flee the Confederacy, and they run into something in the woods and it kind of changes their lives forever. And so I was kind of hesitant going in. I was like, man, I don't know if this is going to be like the one for me, like we'll see how it goes. But it very much was. And
yeah,
I think your writing makes it accessible to a point where you don't have to be a history buff to want to read this kind of a novel. You don't have to, it seems like it's a very intentional set piece and time period that you set it in, and I would love to hear more about how you came to that decision to set it then.
yeah,
But in general, it was still very easy for me to read and enjoyable for me to read, even though like those aren't typically my things that I would look for in a book. So I'm kind
yeah,
of curious about your decisions for the time period you set it, the setting, like the actual setting, there in Mississippi, um,
yeah,
and all those things. And being from the South, I know how horrendous exploring the wilderness can be.
yeah. Right. And so I wrote a. a while back, I want to say it was like 2017, I wrote a novella called Shiloh,
Yeah.
and it was a Civil War novella, and it was the entire thing takes place at the Battle of Shiloh, and there's two brothers or twin brothers, and or maybe they're not twins, I can't remember, but anyway, they're brothers, and um, and after I wrote that story, I was like, never again. I'm never writing another historical fiction piece ever again. I swear to God, that is it. Because I did so much research and it
Yeah,
was so
yeah.
intensive. And it's also, it's not just like, I have a folder like this thick where it's like maps and the battle lines and who all the different battalions and brigades and blah blah blah, and like who was there and who wasn't there, and how they attacked and all that kind of stuff. So it was very intensive because I wanted to get as much of it as I could get right. I wanted to get right.
Yeah, yeah.
And but the thing that you don't think about is that while you're writing the book or writing the story, how much stuff more stuff you've got to know. Like oh, he got shot and so his brother like took off his shirt, and
Mhm.
I'm like, what kind of like underwear did they wear?
Yeah,
Like I have
yeah.
no idea. And when I was writing Serafina, there's a million of those moments where it was like, did they have scissors in 1862, or what did they use, or how did they shape? So little things like you just every like you keep coming. It's like every page was like a book report,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
um, so the point is, I didn't want to do it. I well first I wrote Boys in the Valley, which
Yeah.
was another historical fiction book. It takes place
Right.
in 1905 primarily, and um and that was a little easier because it was so contained. All I didn't have the research I did was primarily around the characters, the way they talk, the words they used, the words they didn't use, what they wore, what orphanages were like during that time. But I was, but the story takes place primarily in the orphanage, so I didn't have to go
Right.
crazy with research. But like you said, a lot of people approached that book too. They were kind of like, I normally would never read historical fiction, but whatever, heard good things, and they end up enjoying because it's not really historical fiction in the sense, to your point, that I'm going to go on for pages about the Emancipation Proclamation or whatever.
Right.
Um, but the key to that is, and then I'm going to answer your question, but the key to that is that when you're writing the historical stuff, is you got to lay it in real light,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
but just enough, like it's that finding that perfect amount where it's just enough that like it keeps the reader in that time period, but
Yeah.
not so much that you're like, look what I know, look at the
Yeah.
Wikipedia page that I just read. So you
Right.
really want to keep it, you really want to just kind of intersperse it as needed. And you want to have a very light touch when it comes to that stuff. That's one thing that I've learned writing these two books.
Mhm.
Um, um, so what happened with Serafina was, and I think I mentioned this earlier, I pitched Nightfire three books. And what happened was I had two books that were fully written. One was called The Blue Butterfly, and one was called Observe.
Mhm.
And I said to my agent, I said, these are the two books I would like Nightfire to choose from for the second book. And my agent said, this is great. I also think that we should give them like like a more straight horror pitch, because
Yeah.
the two books, one book ended up being The Third Rule of Time Travel, which is science fiction
Right.
that sold to Orbit, and then one book is more of a speculative thriller that has not yet been sold. So I was like, oh, okay. And she goes, do you have any ideas? And I didn't, but I was busy, so I just kind of said, well, and I'll just crank out this idea. They're not going to want it because they're going to want one of the books that are done. They can read the whole book. And so I just cranked out this idea of like three brothers, Civil War. They try and get home and they run into this house in the middle of the woods and horror ensues, blah, blah, blah. And it was like three paragraphs. And I
That's the one.
cut to me meeting with my editor a few weeks later, and she's like, hey, so I read the two books, I've read your pitch. We want the pitch. And I was like, of course you do. Um, so that was how I got stuck writing Serafina. And and I'm very glad that I did, because I really liked that book. I really liked the book, and I really liked the way it turned out. And I learned so much writing it. Um, and it's a very personal book, like I mentioned. So I'm really very happy um, that I was kind of, you know, forced, cornered into doing that novel, because I don't think I ever would have, because of my experience with the other historical thing I wrote. I'm glad that I was forced to do it, but it was an absolute ton of research. Um, I did my
Yeah.
very, very best to, like, everything from the plants to the season, making sure that what kind of berries were available,
Yep.
what was the land like, what was the what, and I had to do a lot of mapping, because they trek
Yeah.
across the
Yep.
country, right? So I had to do a lot of mapping of how long would this take for them to to walk, really going through this stuff, and what towns were there in
Yeah.
1862. So I had to find old maps. I mean, it was a thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I ultimately really enjoyed. I didn't I didn't love the process of writing the book, because it was so much
Yeah.
work.
Well,
It
yeah,
was
it's
so much
tedious.
work, and yeah, and it was, and I write fast,
Yeah.
generally speaking. So I was really, I was forced. I had to force myself to write slower, which also I think affects the book too. I think the pacing is very different in Serafina than in Boys in the Valley or in Third Rule of Time Travel,
Yeah.
which are much more kind of like page turner. Um, I don't know. Maybe you think it's a page turner. I didn't think so, but so the idea. So that was why I got stuck with the original idea. Now, as far as the setting and stuff, I actually had a buddy who has a house in Natchez, Mississippi, where I spent some time
Yeah.
and got to know some of the local folks, and went to their historical thing downtown, because I'm a nerd and I wanted to see, like, some of the history stuff, and kind of fell in love with this little city in Mississippi. And so
Yeah.
that's why I set them their home in Natchez. Obviously, 100 years, 100 plus years, whatever it is, 200 years before I went there. But
Right.
that's why I picked it. And then Shiloh was the obvious choice, because that's where I'd already done so much goddamn research about Shiloh, that I was like, well, I've already put in the heavy lifting.
Hell yeah.
I'm just going to start it there and get them from Shiloh, Tennessee, down to Natchez, Louisiana. So it worked out, and it ended up being a good roadmap. Um, and I liked the idea. Generally speaking, I like stories that don't take place in present day,
Yeah.
because I feel like if I can set a story, even like A Child Alone with Strangers, which is set in like the
Yeah.
I think it's the 90s, like early
Hmm.
90s, like, even something, it's modern, but it's not present day modern. So, and it's not just the cell phone thing, it's not just the internet thing.
Yeah.
It's also just because I want to take I want to I want to create a world for the reader to go to. And
Yes.
I feel like stories that are written in present day, I feel like there's a layer of that you can never, as a reader, you can't fully immerse
Yeah.
in the story world, because you're attached to the things that, like, the little pop-up things, a cell phone message, or a tweet, or a text message, or something, just little things like that, or jumping on Google to do a thing. If your characters do that in the book, I feel like you're kind of pulling the reader out of the story a little bit. So, because they're thinking about their own day or their own life.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'd rather them not think about that. I'd rather them be completely immersed in the story world that I've created. So not that I would never do that, but as a rule, I try and set my stories in different time periods in the present, because I like creating from the ground up. And I like creating a bubble
Hmm.
for readers to go into. So it's a full experience, and it's not just like it's not something that um, maybe is a little, um, like I said, I guess present day, or has pop culture references, or
Yeah.
anything like that. I really try and stay away from all of that kind of stuff. Politics, I definitely stay far away from. And so for all those reasons, because I don't want the reader to be distracted from what's happening on the page. I want the reader to be full, like I said, full immersion in the story and on the page. So that's another reason I do enjoy doing these other settings. That said, I will never, I'm going to say it again. I will never do another, I will never do another historical piece. I think that's it. At least 18, at least Civil War era,
Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Maybe I'll have may all have like a Gothic novel set in medieval times, something where they're all in a castle. Who knows? But that's a little different because you can make stuff up. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's like pitchforks and lanterns, right? It's easy. So
Right.
the but yeah, I think I'm going to try and stay away from historical here, especially the Civil War, because I can tell you this from personal experience. Civil War buffs will let you know if you mess up.
Yeah, yeah.
Like no joke, they will let you know, and it's miserable because I try so hard,
Well,
to get everything right, and it's like
yeah.
one little thing, man. You get that
Oh
one
yeah.
little thing wrong, you know, they will come after you big
Well,
time with
it's
them and their mothers who's lived above them in their
yeah,
homes.
yeah. No, and like, I've lived in the South my whole life, and so like, you go to the gas station and you make one wrong comment about history and they're whipping out the
Oh, interesting.
history book to, tell you,
So
about
where do
it.
you live in the South, generally speaking?
I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, but
Okay,
I grew up south of New Orleans. And then I also spent a lot of time in Mississippi because I did my first year of undergrad at Mississippi State, and we had friends who lived in northern Mississippi. So I've kind of been all around the general area. But no,
okay.
I know what you mean by like, getting your history straight on everything.
Yeah, so that's interesting to me though. So that you read so when you read the book, you were much more familiar with the areas I was talking about
Yes, yes,
than
yes,
I
yes.
was,
No,
because
we would
I was
literally
making it up, so I had
yeah.
no idea.
No, you literally drive you can drive like the Natchez Trace, I think, like the highway, like the scenic highway or whatever, to get up to
Yeah,
North Mississippi and stuff like that. Which I think that
yeah,
we did
Alabama.
unintentionally. Yeah, I think we did that unintentionally one time, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah,
Um,
and the trace was really fascinating writing
yeah,
about the trace, because I had to write about and that was a little bit of a bit bouncing act, because I was a little bit like, I can't just call it the trace because people don't know what I'm talking about. So
yeah,
I had to kind of like, that's another one of the historical things where I had to kind of finesse it. I had to like inform the reader a little bit, but not give them like a paragraph of like description.
right.
So it's like informing you of what the trace is, and when I reference the trace, you kind of know what I'm talking about. But that was another thing when I was researching, was I had to see what was the trace like in
Hmm.
1862 during the Civil War, and there were a lot of interest in the Mississippi River that
Yep.
is in the book, and what was that like during this particular time of the Civil War, like the gunships and the transportation ships, and who'd control the river and all that stuff. I had to really really study and research, because I wanted it to get it at least as right as I think my thinking was, if I don't get everything right, it's not going to be from lack of effort. And
No.
so I'm just going to like do my best and hope that that's enough. Although I know it
No,
won't be.
no, no.
But
I think it was, and like you kind of mentioned, like having that light touch of, it's the fine line of immersing the reader versus like writing a history textbook. Like
right,
you don't want to, you're not trying to sit here and explain the whole entire landscape to the reader. You're just, it's a plot device. It's a backdrop. It's a whole thing to aid the story. It's not the story itself. Although I will say the first third to like the first half of Sarafina, I would say a lot of the horror, like and the small things that you did get right, like down to like the food that they're forced to eat, like
yeah,
what they're rationing because they're on the run, they're in the not being accessible to, normal commodities. There's a lot of horror in that, in being on the run, being injured, like all of those things. That was just like the normal like horrors of war that I feel like you nailed very well
thank
without
you.
over explaining and like bogging the story down and those things because it's still propelled forward into the other I don't want to name what it is, but the other side of Serafina, which is, the thing that they find in the woods.
Right,
So
when they meet Serafina, sure,
yeah, so like I
that's
think
not
it
a
was a
spoiler, is it?
I think it's
No.
a unique balance that you were able to pull off. And like Serafina's not, you said something about it not necessarily being a traditional page turner. To me, it was a page turner, but in its own way. Because
Hmm.
like you did something special with it, and I'm not going to get into too much detail about it, but like you kind of like go there and then pull back a little bit, and then we go there again
Hmm.
at one point. And I thought that that was really interesting because, whenever you're reading sometimes straightforward horror, you're waiting for like the, oh, it's going to get really, really bad and then it's going to, resolution. But Seraphine is kind of a winding way, and I really appreciated that about the story. And I think there's one thing I have to talk to you about.
Yeah,
in all of the things that you have read, there has been at least one line that if you are not carefully reading, you would miss it. But it is like you will spin the whole story on that one line, and you do it very subtly.
yeah.
You did it in Gothic with a certain scene. I believe it was whenever he was going it like the wife had already gone to bed and then he gets up to go write some more, and there was something very disturbing about that whole thing.
About the way he left the room.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
yeah.
Nailed it in one line. And then there was another instance of this in Sarafina, and I was like, "Oh, holy crap, this is a whole different ball game now." Is that something that you intentionally you're like, "Okay, I'm gonna keep my cards close to my chest for now, and then we're gonna do like a subtle reveal," or is that just kind of like the way that you write? And I'm inclined to think it's just your style because like I said, I've come across it in multiple books.
Um, it's a good question. It's I don't want to say it's not intentional, but I don't overthink it either.
Yeah.
I think it's a style thing. I think it's because uh I like those moments. I like those like holy shit moments when you're reading a book. And
That's what I call them.
and you have to earn it, right? But you have to earn it. So you
Yeah.
can't like just go blah blah blah. It's like you have to be like, so it's kind of like you're you're building up to a moment, and
Hmm.
that moment is like it's like a to your point, it's like a hinge, and and it just turns the story a little bit this way. You know, you
Yeah.
think you're going this way, and it's like this. So and so yeah, I think it's just a style. I think I just like to. I like that. I love having those little moments. I'm kind of curious what your Serafina moment is. I might have to ask you for a hint, but
Yeah.
but I know, but yes, but I know what you're talking about. I do that even in my short stories too. But yeah, I think it's just a style thing where I just the way I like to surprise the reader. I like very much for my stories to not go as you think they are going to go,
Yeah.
and I think part of that comes from being you know, an avid reader myself. Is
Yeah.
when I'm writing my stories, if I feel like if I feel like if I can, I don't know, if I feel like I'm getting to being too obvious, or if I feel like the story's going somewhere that is too expected, I will kind of step back from it. I'll be like, well, hold on. Why don't we think about this? Maybe we can go a different direction. And I think even with Serafina, I changed course a couple times
Hmm.
um, on the events that happened in the book.
Yeah.
um, so not dramatically different story, but I changed the characters, did things a little bit differently, or
Yeah.
I just tweaked it a little bit so that it wasn't so trope or so
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
obvious. And yeah, and with Gothic too, you know, as well, you know, I've gotten a little bit of kickback about it, but I don't, which I don't mind, but I really loved the idea um of that book having like not having your traditional structure,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
having your
Yeah.
traditional pat ending. Like the book, you know, like I remember one of my reader friends was had been reading it, and they got to a certain point in the book, and they were like messaged me, and they were like, how am I? I feel like I've just reached the end of this book, but there's like 100
Yeah.
pages left.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was like, I don't know what to tell you. You have to keep reading. So,
Yeah.
um, and I think that happens, you know, so I think that's happened. I think that's a little bit happens in Boys in the Valley too. So a couple of things that I like doing very much in my screenplays and in my novels and stories is I very much like turning something on its head, which is kind of a cliche movie term, but I like starting something one way
Hmm.
and then kind of flipping it into something completely different. I love movies that do that. I love books
Yeah.
that do that, and I love as a writer to do that because it entertains me. Um, but I also like to subvert expectations in a way so that with characters specifically, so that if you think a character, you think you know what a character is going to do, or
Right.
what a character, what the character's role in this story is, because you've seen 100 movies, 100 million
Yeah.
movies, and you've seen read 100 million books, and you're like, okay, this is this guy, and this is this guy, and this is this, you know, the villain's going to be this person, they're going to do this. I love saying like, well, I'm just going to kind of like mix that all up
Yeah.
and do something very different with all these characters. Not just for the sake of doing something different, but also to make the characters more alive and more real and more complex.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big a big thing for me is I don't like my characters to be two-dimensional. I like them to be very complicated people and have complicated motivations, and everyone's a little dark and everyone's a little light, and there's not that just general sense of like, this is going to go exactly where you think it's going to go,
Right.
or
Yeah.
this person is going to do exactly what you think they're going to do. I really like to play on those expectations, and that can lead to some of those fun moments where you
Yeah.
pull the rug out of a little bit from under people. Yeah,
Yeah. It's not quite like an Alfred Hitchcock twist because like those there's a I don't know, there's
I'm terrible
almost
at those plot
yeah,
twists. I'm terrible at plot twists.
there's almost like a pattern crescendo to which like those happen to where like you can pick up on those things. But in a way like, and now reflecting back on it with Gothic kind of follows the same story structure as Serafina to me whenever I think back on it now in terms of like, oh, we're gonna go there and then we're gonna back off and then we're gonna go there again maybe.
Yeah,
Um and so I think that it's just really unique because it delivers a unique sense of suspense that nobody's really used to. And you're able to pull off a twist that way. You're able to surprise the reader still because it's not a formulaic approach, I guess. Um,
yeah,
so
yeah,
that's one of the things I've gotten the most out of your books. I think I have to say is I'm constantly like, oh, I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea.
yeah. And I think yeah. I mean, you try, and I think it's just sometimes you try and do that, and then sometimes I mean, ultimately you're just trying to tell the best story you can, and those are the whatever leads to that is
Hmm.
what you try and incorporate. I think people are going to be surprised a little bit at the third rule of time travel, because I think expectations are for that book, especially for people who don't know my work, because
Hmm.
that book's going to be marketed to a much different audience in a
Right.
way, because it's not horror, and it's a little more mainstream. But I'm very curious because that book is not necessarily what you think it is. It's
Yeah.
marketed as like like the cover is like very much like this is a very traditional kind of like science
Right.
fiction, you know, time travel novel, but it's really not. It's you haven't read it yet, have you?
No, I
You
haven't.
read
Yeah.
that one, yeah.
You
So
sent me
okay,
the
so I
e-arc
want
on
to give
it, but I'm gonna
right,
get to it
right. And
eventually.
no, it's okay. I don't want to give anything. No, I know you got. I know
Yeah.
it's okay. I don't want to give anything away. So, but that's a book that I think will surprise people
Yeah.
as to what it is and what happens in that story. And I think I'm hoping in a very good way, in a very positive way, because I think for science fiction writers who aren't used to horror elements, I
Yeah.
think it'll be really fun. And I
I
think
think so. Yeah.
for horror readers that are reading this because they've read my other stuff and they want to maybe read my science fiction take, I think we'll be very happy because I I don't know. I just I tried to do something very different
Yeah.
than the standard um, kind of science fiction novel approach. And so yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I think as a writer, you always have to be engaged with what you're doing. You
Hmm.
have to be excited, and just like as if you were reading the book, you have to, you have to be excited about what's going to happen next. You have to be excited about what the characters are doing, and I think that's one of the things as a writer that allows me gives me a little bit of the success that I've had. Is I think when I write, I'm very much thinking not necessarily of the reader in the sense that I am catering my writing to the because you can't do that because every reader has a
Right.
different opinion, but almost to me as a reader. I'm
Yeah.
catering to the reader me, and what would I want to happen next in this book if I was reading it,
Hmm.
and that excites me as a writer, so it kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I can definitely see like how that works out. And to kind of go back to one other thing that you said that I wanted to touch on was the lending authenticity to your characters to have them maybe make decisions that you wouldn't expect. That I think that that's something that's super true in Serafina. I remember it was really true in Gothic. And then like most of all, A Child Alone with Strangers was a very that was a book with a lot of humanity in it whenever like there was no
Mm,
humanity to be found, and that's like that is so true of that book in my opinion. Um so it's interesting to see how it kind of plays out across your works. But I'm really interested
yeah,
to pick up the third rule of time travel now because I'm into like, I'm like an X-Files fan. I like anything that's weird. It doesn't have to be horror. It can just be weird shit. Um
yeah,
so So, I don't typically read a whole lot of sci-fi, but like that's not to say that, I wouldn't love something like that.
Well, you weren't a big you weren't a big
Yeah.
historical fiction fan either, so here we are. But
So
that's
true, so
I think
true.
that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is I think people who are not necessarily normal. I think it's got a lot for everybody, but
Yeah.
it's just and I don't know. I don't want to. I'm caveating my own thing by saying I'm just saying as the way the book ended up, I was very happy with the way it turned out, and I think that based on what I know of the people who've read my stuff, I think it'll be a pleasant surprise um, for folks, and I think Autumn Springs will be a will be a very interesting, I'll say interesting
Yeah.
surprise for folks who I think will probably go into something called the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre with a very preset idea of what they're getting into, and I think people will be a little surprised at what the what they actually what they actually are getting into with that book, because it's not just like a slasher. It's got incredible it's just got incredible heart to it, and so I'm really
Yeah.
excited for that one to come out.
Well, I'm excited for that one to come out. I just read like Brian McCauley's Curse of the Reaper, and that's a slasher with a lot of heart in it. And then Stephen Graham Jones
Yeah,
just did I Was a Teenage Slasher with a lot of heart in it. And so I'm
yeah,
all for this trend of like emotionally devastating slashers. I'm
yeah.
totally on board with it.
I think it's yeah, I think it's just I don't know. I think it just adds so much more to the
Yeah.
to the story. And I think if you can do it, if you can pull it off,
Hmm.
and I've been saying for years, because with some of my work is I've gotten some criticism from some readers about maybe, especially with my stories, not so much with the novels, but a little bit with the novels too, which is like, boy, this is a slow burn, and then it gets good, and it's like, yeah, but I think the reason it gets good is because I've I've you've invested some
Yeah.
we've
You've seen
I've
the
put some
humanity
money in
in
the
it.
bank.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I mean, and it's a trick. I mean, it's a bit of a tight wire act because you're trying to introduce characters, you're trying to make them flesh and blood, you're trying to make them complex, and you're trying to build this world. And even in a novel, you have a little more leash with doing that,
Yeah.
but not a lot. And then in a short story, you have almost no leash with
Yeah.
that. So the trick is building up those, building up all that character um, work and the relationships, while also keeping things moving, and
Yeah.
also maybe you have a little bit of you're punching in information, or maybe you have a couple in a couple of like an event, an incident here and an incident there, just to kind of keep it lively um, for the reader, but while you're also trying to like sneakily get in character development.
Yeah.
Um, that's tricky to do, especially in a novel. It's tricky to do because you really have to. You don't want to like get to page 50 and be like still like
Yeah.
developing characters.
Or be tapped
Um,
out or be like done, like, oh,
yeah,
did it all in one
yeah,
shot.
yeah. So it's a tricky balance, but one that I try, and sometimes that's something you do in the second draft or the third draft. You like realize like this is taking too long to get going. Sarafina was actually one of the critiques I got for that book, was that it took too long to get going, and that because the brother, before they get to that, the 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 person giving me feedback was like, I really want them to get to the house faster,
Oh, okay, okay, gotcha.
and that's not a spoiler for those listening.
Yeah.
It's in the little copy thing, marketing copy. Um, but the problem with that is that if I just get into the house, then you don't, then it doesn't, then
Yeah.
you're not invested in how they got there. They have to
Right.
be on death's door, and the only way to get them on death's door is for me to take your hand as a reader and say, these are the experiences that these guys are going through, so that you really buy into what happens. Because otherwise, everything, half the stuff that happens, you won't buy it, because you'll be like, well, why
Yeah.
did they just blah blah blah, or why did they just blah blah? It's like, so you really have to work. So when you're writing a novel like that, you really have to like Serafina, for example. I really had to find that balance of like um of basically making we said it earlier, making the reader take their medicine, as it were, like
Yeah.
I'm like, and but also doing it with like a spoonful of sugar. So like,
Yeah.
so there was some fun stuff happening. There's some wild stuff happening. There's some kind of little bit of the ultra violence, never hurts. And but meanwhile, like you're experiencing this with these characters, so that when I get to the set, when I get past the setup, um, you're totally on board and you
Right.
totally get it. You know, so it's fun. It's as a writer, it's fun to figure those puzzles out, but it's also part of what makes the process difficult sometimes.
Yeah. And like another thing too is, you said Serafina is ultimately a novel about family and the ties that bind, and you're not gonna know that just by having them arrive at the house. Like the events that lead up to their arrival at the house say a lot about them as well and how like they react to them, how they handle them, the things that they say, the things that they do. So I think that that's one of those things that it leaves room for character development. They get there in a certain state, and then by the conclusion, you're like, oh, it's like that's probably why he said that or did that.
Yeah,
Um,
100%. Just like, I mean, same with Boys in the Valley.
yeah,
If you don't get, you can't. If the stranger who shows up in the middle of the night, if that happens on page 5, it's a totally different story.
right.
And I think so. I think those are all, but I've gotten, some criticism for that book being a slow burn, which I don't think it is. But but I think sometimes people like a slow burn means like there's prose and nobody died on page 1. So, but 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 I miss the old days. But that was a story where the same thing where it's like you had to put in that time.
Yeah,
Um, but you try, but the other side, like I said, is you have to also make it engaging, and you have to be delivering. One of the things about screenplays is they're always like, it's
yeah,
delivery information, and if you have a scene that does not deliver any new information, then that scene is not in the movie.
right, right.
So, and I've learned a lot about writing fiction from my screenplay writing days. I said my screenplay writing days because it was all I was doing from like 2010 to like 2015
Yeah,
was writing screenplays, and I producing a couple things, but I learned a lot about structure and about character development and about story writing. Um, writing screenplays for studios and stuff like that. So you learn a lot about
yeah,
what keeps a story interesting, what keeps a story moving, and little tricks that you can use to keep the reader engaged, while also giving them like information that they need for late. To your point, so later on, you're
right.
like, oh, I
Yeah.
didn't even realize why you gave me this information, and now it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean that makes a lot of sense. And like as somebody I spent a whole weekend watching movies this weekend, the art of writing a scene, whether it's in a book or in a movie, that doesn't feel like shoehorned in, like forcefully, like you need to learn about Nancy, who's her sister, and had this happen to her
Right.
when she was 6, but in a way that's graceful. I think like there's a graceful delivery in good writing and in good information revealing, that lends itself a long
Yes.
way to good story. So I totally agree with you
Yes.
there. But yeah, no, I mean, I love I would love to talk to you in depth about Serafina and all the things that are revealed, but of course I don't want to spoil it for everybody else because I want everybody to read it. But it's a novel that I think it's not really what you think it is when you pick it up in the best possible way. It is dark and it is a horror novel, but I absolutely loved it. And I want to see other people read it. Um, and I'm just super excited for everything else that you have coming out. Like I said, you are an incredibly busy person with everything that's up on the horizon for you. And I'm incredibly interested about the D7 that's coming out with Shortwave. That,
Yeah.
yeah, haunted music is always like a little fun thing for me. So
Oh, and then you'll love it.
yeah, that's right up my alley. Oh man, okay. I think that we covered just about everything I wanted to. I'm right at the top of the hour. Is there anything that you wanted to mention that I did not mention myself? Like any
No,
projects, anything like that?
I would like to know what movies you watched, that when if you had any recommendations, since you've been sitting and watching movies so much while you've been
Oh
sick.
man.
Did anything stand out as being great? I watched a couple.
Well,
I started to watch a movie, and I won't say the movie because I don't like to disparage filmmakers or creators. But
yeah.
I watched a movie last night, and I think we got 3 minutes into it, and I was like, nope, I'm out. Like
Yeah.
I just know this movie's not for me. Like it's just I can just tell
Y-
by the way it's
Yeah.
looks, by the way it's acted, by the way they're edited. Like I was just like, no, 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 no. Moving on. So I
Yeah.
haven't seen a good movie. Hard. I'm very hard to please when it comes to movies. I'm curious if something that you like loved.
Yeah, so well, first of all, I have to bring it up. VHS Beyond. I watched that last
Yeah.
night, scared the
Okay.
shit out of me, but it's because I hate
Awesome.
aliens. So I don't know why I
Okay.
did that to myself. I mean, like I was like glutton for punishment on that.
Right.
But that was like that would there's a segment, one of the segments in there, had me jump scare for jump scare, like back to back to back, and I can't tell you the last time that that's happened to me. And I mean, I was at home, it's on streaming. It's not like I was in the movie theater.
Right.
Um, so that was impressive to me.
Okay, good. Yeah,
Um,
that one's on my short list, so I'll look it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, it's a good one. And then I saw I kind of I read Carrie for the first time this year. Was absolutely
Oh, okay.
blown away. Watched the De Palma film, absolutely loved it. Like probably top 5 movie of mine for like all of my life. And then
Yeah.
like, I did the deep dive on like all of the Carrie stuff and like I knew that there was like the Revenge or whatever it was, Carrie 2, and I saw like it was
Yeah.
rated pretty poorly. But then I saw
Yeah.
that it was on like Tubi or something, and I was like, I'm gonna give it a try.
Sure.
Honestly, I wasn't mad about it. Um,
Really?
it's like
Interesting.
it's really angsty and it's really 90s, early 2000s, which is, like
I love
that's yeah, me too. I love it no matter
my
what.
wheelhouse. Yeah.
But it's really like it's really timely. In today's like in light of like the Me Too movement, it's very
Yeah.
timely. And it was like it pulled on the same heartstrings of like, oh, this is just a tragedy, not a good for her moment. That I
Right.
felt with De Palma's Carrie. I mean, by no means is it, like a top 5 movie of mine, but I don't know that it deserved all the hate that it got. I might be like
Now,
I might have a hot take on that one.
now this
So
is Carrie 2. This isn't the reboot Carrie.
oh no, no, we're not talking about that.
Which
This is called
that I've heard is
yes.
awful, and I
Oh
don't know
yeah,
why,
no, that is awful.
but Carrie 2. Yeah.
Yeah, this is like it brought back like Sue Snell is like a guidance counselor at a high school, and then basically like she kind of sees the same things that happen with Carrie happening with another female student whenever her
Okay.
best friend commits suicide, and then it kind of like just devolves into like the high school drama and the interior life
Hmm.
of that friend, and Sue tries to like help her. Is interesting. It was really really interesting to me.
Hmm. You know, it's a great old Stephen King, probably one of my, because you mentioned Carrie, and I
Yeah.
know De Palma's the master, but John Carpenter did Christine.
Christine, yeah. Yeah.
Have you
Uh,
seen that one?
yes, I have. And I really liked it. I feel like
I
that movie
love
catches
that
so much
movie.
shit, and I don't know
No,
why.
I love that movie. When that car's on flames
I know.
driving down, it's such
Yes.
a great, because it's practical.
Yeah.
They
And when it
freaking lit a
rebuilt
car on
itself,
fire.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the rebuild. I was that a movie that's a movie that I think aged very well, and it's one of my favorite King adaptions. And I'm so
Yeah.
bummed out that they're doing a Blumhouse whatever cheapo knockoff remake of it,
Oh,
because
really? I didn't know about that. Ugh.
yeah, I think they got it. Um, well, that's great to know. I'll check out VHS Beyond, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's I think it just came out on Friday. There's like 2 segments in there that like really freaked me out. And then, everybody watched Salem's Lot this weekend, but I still didn't do it. The
I
new
didn't
one
watch it
that came
either.
out. Yeah, I haven't heard great things, but I'll get around to it eventually.
Speaking of Carrie, and your projects, I guess I could plug the I'm in a book called, I don't
Oh
know, actually I
yeah.
don't know. I'm in a but it's a book of Carrie nonfiction of
Yeah, yeah,
essays
yeah. I
that
pre-ordered
I'm
that as
in.
soon as I saw
Yeah,
it. I did so
It's a
fast.
Levidian Cemetery Dance. I think they're like
Yeah.
co-publishing it. So that's available. I think they're pre-ordering it now.
Yeah,
And
they
then
did
they're
a
gonna base the
deal. Yeah, they're doing the print run based on the pre-orders, and so I think it runs until I think like the 15th, I want to say, October 15th. And then
oh
that's going to
really?
determine
Okay.
how many they make. I don't know for certain. I'll find out and I'll post it whenever I post this video. I'll put it in the notes, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of good writers in that. I didn't
Yeah.
do I think the idea was to do like a reminiscing about Carrie. I didn't do a reminiscing. I did an essay about religion in
Oh,
Carrie,
that's so interesting.
because Stephen King actually has not alluded. He's said a lot of things about the Bible references and the religious references and the Antichrist kind of
Yeah.
illusion and all that kind of stuff. So I really kind of did a little bit of a deep dive on that kind of stuff. So it was an interesting essay to write. So that book's out there by that I did a little thing in. And then yeah, other than that, now just my novels are coming out.
Yeah.
Right, the Serafina's coming out, and then and Serafina. is also going to be. I did do a trade deal for that book
Oh,
as
awesome.
well,
Okay, cool. That's good to
but
know.
it hasn't been announced. It hasn't been announced yet.
Yeah, I've heard I had a
But
few
it's going to
people
be
ask me.
a ways.
Yeah,
It's going to be a ways down because next year, like I said, I got two books coming out, and
right.
so we had to push it.
Yeah.
But there will be at some point a trade edition.
Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, I had a few people ask me if it was available in trade. But no, that's good to know. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much, Philip, for all of your time and everything that we talked about because we talked about so much.
yeah.
I cannot wait for everything to be available to everybody. And maybe we'll talk again once I read the third rule of time travel because it sounds like it's a novel for me based on what you're saying.
Oh yeah, I hope you like it. Yeah, absolutely. Would love to come on anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Philip. I'm gonna list everything in the video notes that's coming out so that people can pre-order and keep track of everything. But for now, just thank you so much.
All right, cool. Thanks, Anna.
No problem.